Good morning. Today is Sunday. This is my day to post my YouTube videos. I first want to thank you for joining me, for watching my videos. It's been a great learning process for me, and it's a way for me to um, express and elaborate on some lessons that I've learned in life, some experiences that I've gone through. And today I want to talk about trusting God. Um, I have been making a few posts for the last maybe week and a half or two on Facebook about trusting God. There are a lot of things that I've experienced in life. Sometimes I didn't trust God. That's a growing process. You have to grow into that by developing really a personal relationship with God. So as I got older, I learned to trust Him more. And in trusting Him, it makes things a lot smoother. I'm not going to say it's easy, but but when it gets easier to trust Him, then things are a lot more easier. You don't worry. You kind of just let go and you let God. I want to speak about my youngest daughter, which was one of the most trusting time I had with God. I really had to trust and believe Him. And if I didn't, she wouldn't be alive today. So I don't know if I'm going to really go into um, everything that happened to us, to her, but I kind of want to tell the story that led up um, to what happened to her. My daughter was born in October, no, September, she's going to get me for that, September 20th, 1999. I was married, but we had separated. And I kind of told you guys about that story. That may have been last week. And so during the pregnancy, I just felt inside of me that I just felt things weren't right. So I went to the doctor and I told him that it's just something wasn't right with my baby. And so they checked me over, and he just told me, well, it's nothing wrong. You're older, because I was 37. You're old. You're kind of old having a kid. And I'm like, okay, I'm kind of old having a kid, but I trust the physician. Not so much as the doctor, but I trust that this is a doctor and he knows what he's talking about. So I went back home. And then after a little time passed, I guess I may have been maybe about 5 or 6 months, and my baby was moving like a little sluggish. That's the way I explained it. So I went back to the doctor, and I told him she's not moving. She's not perky. It's like a sluggish movement. And he kind of just shrugged it off again, not really listening to me. But um, they placed me in the complication clinic, and so I would go like once a month, and they would check me out and found out that my amniotic fluid, I really don't know exactly what it was. I don't know if it was low but it was something with the amniotic fluid. Okay, so during that time, my oldest daughter, she was a C-section baby. I'll tell you guys about that another time. I was in labor a real long time, for 3 days, and they really should have took her earlier. But again, they don't listen a lot to the mother, the pregnant mother, or the family. But I had a C-section with her. So during this pregnancy, I came into some information that if you had a C-section with your first child, you can request a C-section with your second child as long as you're full term, the full 9 months. So, like I said, I had a personal relationship with the Lord. I was, in church a lot, in my Bible, and just really hearing from Him. There were different things that happened while I was pregnant. Like one thing was, my cousin and I were going to the store, and we had some kids in the car, her kids and a couple other kids. And as we got ready to get out the car, I told her, I said, I don't think we were going to leave the kids in the car. This was back in like 99. And she said, well, we're just running in for a minute. I said, I just feel like something's going to happen. She said, what's going to happen? Nothing's going to happen. Back then, they weren't stealing the kids and weren't taking the car. But she left the keys in the car, left the car running. And one of the children was around like 10 years old. And we were only in there for like about maybe 6 minutes. Well, when we came back out, the police were everywhere, and the kids were screaming and hollering. And we was getting in the car. They weren't at our car, but they was right next to it. And we got in the car. We was like, what happened? What happened? It was like someone took the lady's purse next to and took her car and drove off. And I was like, oh my goodness. But I had a feeling, an unresting, now that I know in retrospect, I can say that it was an unresting feeling in my spirit that made me feel like something was going to happen, and it did. So I had a few things happening like that as I was pregnant. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the labor. I was at home by myself. My oldest daughter was over to my mom's house, and my water broke. And I'm like, oh my God, my water broke. So I call my mom, and I tell them, we got to go to the hospital. My water just broke. And I said, I'm having labor pains. I started having labor pains in my stomach. And they came and got me. And we were on our way to the hospital, and the pains were getting closer and closer together. So we got to the hospital, and they checked me out. The doctor checked me out. Well, it wasn't the doctor. I think it may have been the nurse practitioner. I'm not sure, but it wasn't the doctor. Checked me out and said that I wasn't in labor and that my water hadn't broke. Now, I know that my water had broke because you know what happens when your water break. Water comes water flows and everything. And my bed my water had broke. And he said I was not in labor and for me to go back home. And I was like, no, I'm not going back home because my water he was like, no, you need. And so my oldest daughter and my mom, they was like, well, Michelle, the doctor said that your water, you're not in labor. I'm like, no, I'm not leaving. And so the idea came back to me, okay, I can have a C-section as long as I'm full term, and I was. So I told him, take the baby out. Take the baby out. I want to have a C-section. They was like, no, you just can't. I said, yes, I can. I'm full term. I say, and I had a C-section the first time. Take the baby out. So at this point, I'm arguing back and forth with the nurse. They go get the doctor. He comes. He tries to talk to me. I'm like, no, take the baby out. Then they get the anesthesiologist, and he come, and he's telling me all these things that really I blocked everybody out because all I know is the baby has to come out. That is what is in my spirit. That is what I stood on because I trust God. And I felt like God was telling me that. So it didn't matter what anyone else said. I was take the baby out. So they proceeded to get me ready to have a C-section. I told my oldest daughter, I want you to stay in here with me. Okay, I was so tired. Let me say this. About 3 or 4 days before I went in labor, I could not sleep. I could not eat. The only thing I could do was drink Hawaiian fruit punch. And I was really exhausted. So when they gave me an epidural, instead of just deadening me, it just knocked me out. So I was knocked out on the table. And they began to um, perform the C-section. Now, my oldest daughter told me this. I guess it was maybe no, a couple of days later after I had the baby. She said, Mama, when you were laying on the table and they were cutting you, she said, you sat straight up on the table and said, don't let them switch my baby. She said, then you went back out. I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't remember that. She said, why did you say that? I said, I don't know why I said that. Okay, I'm going back to the procedure. So they finished the cutting and they're taking the baby out, and all I can hear was a, and I'm like, I'm barely awake, but I'm like, she's here, and that's all I could hear was, and I went back out. So when I woke up again, I was in the recovery room, and it was the next day. Well, I don't know if I think it was the next day because I think it was like maybe around maybe 4 in the morning, 4 or 5 in the morning when I had the baby. And so I wake up and I'm like, okay, where's my baby? Where's my baby and where's my family? And they're like, well, your family's at home. They went home to get some rest. And I'm like, well, wow, why would they leave? But I didn't know a lot of time had passed. So it was the next day around, I guess, maybe 8 or 9. And I said, well, where's my baby? They said, well, okay, well, you just got to wait. You have to be able to move something from the waist down in order, for us to, I guess, talk to me or I asked any questions there was a process. So I said, well, okay. So I concentrated on trying to move my feet, and I finally moved a toe or two, and I called them back in, and so they said, well, okay, we're going to take you to your room. I said, and bring my baby. Well, I want to see my baby. And so they said, okay, the doctors are going to come in and talk to you. And I'm like, okay, the doctor's going to come in and talk to me, but I want to see my baby. They said, okay, you're going to see your baby. They take me in the room, so I'm waiting, and the doctors finally come in. I know it was 2 foreign doctors. So they had this real thick accent. They told me that everything was going to be all right. The baby, the baby, the baby swallowed meconium off the bowels, and clogged up the baby lungs. The baby lack of oxygen to the brain, so the baby will not live. Or if the baby live, the baby would be mentally impaired, kind of like brain dead. I'm like, what? Where's my baby? And they just continued to say that we have done all that we can do. The baby, and they just kept repeating it and repeat. I said, I need to talk to my family. So they left out. I called my mama, trying to find out what's happening. She told me the same thing. Michelle, the baby really sick, and the baby is in a coma, and the baby is not even at the hospital. The baby is at Children's Hospital. They had to rush her to Children's Hospital and put her in an induced. She was in an induced coma. Long story short, they kept trying to tell me how my baby wasn't going to live. So maybe I guess around that 3rd or 4th day, when they came in to say that to me again, I said, look, stop trying to prep me for the demise of my daughter, because she will live and not die. Now, what you're not going to do is keep doing that to me. You've told me what you needed to tell me, and I don't want to hear it anymore. I want to see my baby. Okay? I understand that you've done all you can do, but I know someone else that can do much more than you. so I didn't deal with them anymore. My husband, we weren't divorced yet. He came up and he was all upset and so trying to figure out what we were gonna do because she was in a coma and she laid in a coma for a month. But now I finally got them to take me to Children's Hospital to see her. And I went to see her like every day. And then they told me that there was a experimental drug that they could use, but it hadn't been approved yet. And so my separated husband was studying to be a microbiologist, and he said he was going to do some research. So I prayed. I began to pray, and the Holy Spirit told me to sign for it. So I signed for it. I hadn't told him, but I signed for it, and it was something that they would shoot through the breathing tube that would go into her throat. And he came back a couple of days and was like, Michelle, you can sign for it. In his accent, African, Michelle, you can sign for the medication. They only need about so many more cases, but they had been experimenting and it was working pretty good, and it would soon be approved if they had so many cases. And I don't know I don't remember exactly how many it was. I know it was in close to maybe 1,000, but that's pretty good. But I said, well, okay, I'll sign. I had already signed. So she began to breathe on her own, little by little, until she was taken off the breathing machine. My baby, I've never seen a baby that sick. She had so many wires coming out of her. And then that breathing machine just shook. And no one could touch her. Well, I couldn't touch my baby. I didn't touch my baby until a month later when they let me hold her. Even the nurses couldn't touch her. They fed her intravenously. No one could touch her because when they picked her up to allow me to hold her, took her out the, I guess it was incubator or plastic little box, but only your arms could reach in. But they took her out for me to hold her, and the side of her head was just smashed in until my oldest daughter screamed. And she said, oh my God, Mama, where? I said, it's okay. We're not worried about that. It's okay. She said, but Mama, I said, baby, black women been molding heads and noses and for years. We're not worried about that. We just want to get her out of here. When I get her out of here, we'll fix all that. Don't worry about it. So I held her, and her dad held her, and my daughter held her. And 3 days later, we were in a room. And 2 days after that, the doctor allowed me. I told the doctor when she came in the room, I said, if you let me take my baby home, you will never see her again. She said, I absolutely believe you. Because of the faith that you had, I'm just looking at this miracle. She's a miracle because she's not supposed to be alive. I said, well, okay, but when can we go home? And we went home in 2 days. And that's the end of that story. I will probably elaborate later. I don't know exactly when, but to give you some more stories on trusting God. Trust God. God will do what He says He will do. But you have to have some scripture in you to speak when it comes time. Because the word of God is the answer, not your word, His word. And I just stood on, I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. She shall live and not die. Those are the 3 scriptures I just repeated over and over again. And He came through it like He always does. So remember to trust God. And that's the end of that story. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you, and I hope you guys have a blessed week. And remember, Trust God.